Today we're going to look at adjective and adverb clauses. Remember, a clause is a group of words that has a verb in its subject. We're going to look at two this week, an adverb clause and an adjective clause. Notice that our abbreviations are there for your DGP. An adjective clause is a dependent clause that modifies a noun or a pronoun. It follows the word or words that it modifies, and it tells which kind or which one. An adjective clause begins with the relative pronoun, that, which, who, whom, whose. Example: Dr. Charles Richter devised the Richter scale, which is used to measure the magnitude of earthquakes. Our adjective clause is highlighted in blue in this example. Which is used to measure the magnitude of earthquakes modifies scale. Scale is a noun, therefore this is an adjective clause. Notice that it begins with the relative pronoun which. So how do you find adjective clauses? Well, first you look for your subjects and your verbs. So let's look at this new example. Ferdinand Magellan, who was the commander of the first expedition around the world, was killed before the end of the journey. So if I'm looking at this, I would look at subjects and verbs. So Ferdinand Magellan would be a subject, was is my verb. Then my second subject would be who, and was is again my verb. So the first thing you do is you look for subjects and verbs. The next thing that you have to do is determine which is dependent and which is independent. So again, if I look at my example here, Ferdinand Magellan, who was the commander of the first expedition around the world, was killed before the end of the journey. So okay, I say, what is my foundation sentence here? And it would be Ferdinand Magellan was killed before the end of the journey. And I'd say, okay, it's a complete thought. It is a complete sentence, so it would be an independent clause. Then I'm going to look at the next part, is who is the commander of the first expedition around the world? Well, it's not a complete thought, so it's dependent on the other part for meaning. Therefore, it's your dependent clause. Notice they both have a subject, they both have a verb. Finally, you need to make sure that the dependent clause modifies a noun or a pronoun. So again, if we look at our example, Ferdinand Magellan, who is the commander of the first expedition around the world, was killed before the end of the journey. So, who was the commander of the first expedition around the world is our dependent clause. What does it modify? It modifies Ferdinand Magellan. So that's a noun, therefore it's an adjective. And the last thing is you look that it starts with a relative pronoun. Who was the commander of the first expedition around the world, who being your relative pronoun. The second thing we're looking at is an adverb clause. An adverb clause is a subordinate or dependent clause that modifies a verb or an adjective or another adverb. An adverb clause tells how, when, where, why, to what extent, or under what conditions. An adverb clause is introduced by a subordinating conjunction. So common subordinating conjunctions are listed here, and I would like you to stop the video at this point and copy these down because you will need them for later reference in your notes. It should be noted that the subordinating conjunction is part of the adverb clause and must be included with it. And when you diagram, you would include that subordinating conjunction as part of your complete predicate. What do adverb clauses look like? Well, here's an example. Donna sounds as if she has caught a cold. Our adverb clause, which is underlined there, tells how about the verb sounds. Notice your subordinating conjunction is underlined and in red. Okay, before we left, we lowered the blinds. Your adverb clause, which is underlined, tells when about the verb lowered. Notice your subordinating conjunction before is in red. And then the last example, you will see our houses when the road turns right. The adverb clause tells where about the verb will see. Notice that your subordinating conjunction is in red. Let's look at a couple more examples. Will you move so that I can see? The adverb clause, which is underlined, tells why about the verb will move. Notice that your subordinating conjunction is highlighted in red. Your stereo is louder than it should be. The adverb clause underlined tells to what extent about the adjective louder, and our subordinating conjunction is in red. Andre can type faster than anyone else in the computer class can. Our adverb clause tells to what extent about the verb faster. So how do I find an adverb clause? Let's look at this example. If the hot air balloon lost altitude, the crew raised it by discarding ballast. So how are we going to determine what is my adverb clause? Well, first we need to decide where the dependent and independent clauses separate and label each. So let's look at them. If the hot air balloon lost altitude, not a complete thought, so that's the dependent part. The crew raised it by discarding ballast, independent. So we've identified our dependent and our independent. Then we identify the subordinating conjunction, if. Then make sure that it is acting like an adverb. It tells under what conditions about the verb raised. So if the hot air balloon lost altitude is our adverbial clause. Okay, now what you're going to do is you're going to go on to the exercises. Bring any questions that you have to class on Monday, and I will see you then.